how's that look for everybody?
We can see it.
All right, great.
Looks great.
Okay, so you guys already know who I am. I wasn't sure who was going to be here. I prepared an introduction, but I'm a double major through ASLIE and SOIS, and my presentation is on Rochester's approach to language access in museum settings. All right, so imagine, if you will, going to a museum and having no idea what the information being presented is, what the huge murals on the wall are, or what the label copy even says. Imagine entering a museum with the intention of learning and becoming more culturally aware, but then leaving feeling even less equipped than when you entered. This is the visitor experience of many individuals in America whose primary language is not English, and people with disabilities. And even more tragically, the experience in a city known for its technological innovation, demographic diversity, and an accessibility mecca, Rochester, New York. In addition, the city of Rochester is home to several nationally and internationally acclaimed museums and historical centers. Rochester has the highest population of working age deaf and hard of hearing residents per capita in the US, and it's home to thousands of international refugees. All of these characteristics combined would seem to be the perfect recipe for technological advancements and language accessibility. However, a closer look shows us that this region and others, it's sorely lacking. All right, so before I make you think that I hate Rochester, I'm going to go ahead and first define the word museum. So we're all on the same page and we all have the same expectations. Historical museums function as centers of public history and public debate, and their role is to disseminate knowledge relevant to a region or nation's cultural heritage. In the museum field, we call this stewardship. And how a museum approaches stewardship in their visitor engagement and collections is based not only on the individual museum's values, vision, and mission statement, but also the guidance put forth by the AAM, the American Alliance of Museums, and ICOM, the International Council of Museums. In January of 2019, ICOM invited the development of a new definition of the museum, which would more appropriately align with societal shifts and perspectives in identity seen on a global scale. Although the vote has been postponed by the organization, this proposed definition is still found on their website and is very important to the museum field as well as my current research. The definition reads as follows: museums are democratizing, inclusive, and polyphonic spaces for critical dialogue. They safeguard diverse memories for future generations and guarantee equal rights and equal access to heritage for all people. They're participatory, work in active partnership with and for diverse communities, aiming to contribute to human dignity and social justice, global equality, and planetary well-being. It's a pretty cool definition if you ask me. This proposed definition emphasizes equality and accessibility, bringing forth the notion that cultural background, experiences, and language are important factors for visitor engagement and public learning. While this upgraded definition is a beautiful representation of what I believe most museum professionals envision for the identity of museums, it doesn't accurately portray how all museums are currently functioning and operating within the US, including Rochester. All right, so now we're going to get a little interactive here. Take a moment, if you will. Close your eyes if you have to, but silence your mind and imagine you're visiting a museum. Maybe it's the Seneca Park Zoo, the RMSC, the MAG. You're out of your car and you're walking up to the entrance. What are the first things you see other than cars and other people? You're probably going to see some signs. Maybe there's banners outside the museum telling you about the current exhibits that are going on. You might see a reception desk with people, whether it be museum docents or other museum professionals. They're there ready to greet you. You'll probably see some more signs and more banners talking about the exhibits that are there in the lobby. Perhaps you'll see a table of pricing for the different experiences that are available or discounts. You might pick up a map or a brochure to guide you through your tour. And as you walk away, you're probably going to see some more signs telling you about like how to get to the different exhibits or service areas like the bathroom or a restaurant or a gift shop. Now already, before you've even purchased a ticket or stepped foot into a museum, you've encountered at least 5 or 6 forms of communication. How many languages are those forms of communication offered in? On this slide, you're going to see a list of museums that I have personally visited and engaged in looking at their language accessibility. I have visited 7 Rochester-based museums and 7 international museums. All of these institutions serve their communities in various ways and were of varying sizes. Some held animals, some were historical, some cultural, some scientific. One thing I would like to point out and acknowledge is that several of the museums I visited abroad were in large city centers and they often accommodate international tourists. However, there are a few institutions which were smaller scale and received much less foot traffic. All of them, however, had some form of multilingual accessibility. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and compare Rochester to the abroad museums. And first I'm going to start with Rochester. Here's a beautiful selfie for you. This is me at the Genesee Country Village Museum. Last semester, I had the opportunity to complete an internship there. Most of you are probably aware that this is a living history museum set in the 19th century. They contacted me directly to complete this internship because they were looking for ways to improve their diversity and inclusion, specifically with regards to the deaf community. While I was there, I was able to provide language access for several large-scale events and promote those services through the museum's social media platforms. I was able to have a direct impact on museum events and their scheduling, marketing, and historical interpretation departments. I am still in direct contact with the managers there and periodically provide counsel on how to make events more inclusive and accessible to the deaf community of Rochester. The next Rochester-based museum I'd like to share with you is the Memorial Art Gallery. Last year, the MAG held a deaf-focused exhibit called Devia. Devia is a style of art created by deaf individuals, which tells the story about the deaf experience, whether that be oppression or celebration of their community. This is a screenshot that I took of the app that was developed for the MAG and is an example of what I think language inclusion could mean for our region. Now, this application is no longer available, so don't try to go download it because you won't find it. It was specifically developed for the Devia exhibit, and it was actually developed here at RIT by students and professors at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. This exhibit showcased an entire room full of pieces from NTID, as well as prominent artists within the deaf community from all over the US. Each piece had a corresponding number to the artwork, and you could type that number into the app and it would automatically bring up an artist biography and an artwork description. I think the app works seamlessly, and I think it was a great example of language inclusion. And I think that that research team could probably take it to other Rochester-based museums to provide ASL and other commonly spoken languages on their virtual tours and applications. These are all the photos I have for you as far as regional museums. For the most part, accessibility is pretty limited. If you're deaf, you can request an interpreter with 2 or 3 weeks notice. However, if you speak another commonly spoken language, such as Chinese or Spanish, you may need to put in even more notice. From what I've seen, none of the Rochester-based museums have brochures or maps in other languages. If they do, then they weren't automatically visible. You'd have to request them specifically. Okay, so now we're going to talk about my international experiences. I have 4 photos I'm going to show you of 4 other museums, but these 3, the photography was either discouraged or not allowed. So I'm going to talk about those first. Paris in general had incredible language access in their museums, even for those who are deaf. Several institutions such as Versailles or Notre Dame had deaf docents who led in French Sign Language tours and then teamed with interpreters who were either deaf or hearing who knew American Sign Language. That was an incredible experience. And I think we were all just blown away to see deaf docents. By the way, we do have 1 deaf docent here in Rochester who usually partners with the MAG to provide sign language tours. The Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and the Jewish Historical Museum in Amsterdam were also great examples of language inclusion. In the Van Gogh Museum, there were audio listening devices, so you could program beforehand which language you wanted to listen to as you went through the museum and the exhibits. There weren't, as far as I saw, any provisions for deaf or blind patrons. The Jewish Historical Museum also had multilingual accessibility. It was rather sombering, but I highly suggest you go. It's super interactive and engaging with its visitors. And what you would do is you go up to a computer and look at images that were taken during World War II, and it was very heavy. But then they would ask you questions and whether or not you thought it was ethical to show those kinds of pictures. But you could pick your language before you stepped into that space. All right, so now the other 4. The first photo in the top left is a device used at the Hash, Hemp, and Marijuana Museum located in Amsterdam. The artifacts, photos, plants, and displays throughout the exhibits had sensors next to them, and you could scan it with a pre-programmed remote that you see in the picture with the language you had selected, and you would listen to it through a headset. This meant that multiple people could come up to the photo or display and scan it and listen to the same content at the same time, but in their own language. There were no provisions made for deaf or blind individuals that I'm aware of. The second photo in the top right is an example of very inclusive label copy. I think there's 8 languages displayed there. This was taken at the Torture Museum in Amsterdam. I know that sounds super fun. Again, this location is heavily trafficked by international visitors in a region which gets exposure to a multitude of languages. So this type of access may be a bit overkill in Rochester, but I think the ethic behind it isn't. Label copy could certainly be more inclusive by representing the most commonly used languages in this region, such as Spanish, Chinese, and sign language. Now, of course, you can't put sign language on label copy, which brings me to my next photo. The bottom left is a photo taken at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum in Hiroshima, Japan. It is dedicated to telling the story of the inhabitants of Hiroshima and the destruction they suffered from the atomic bombing done by US military forces. Again, very sobering, very heavy, but I think every American should experience it. If you have the opportunity, definitely go. The photo is probably too small for you to see, but the label copy is about 7 foot tall, and the text is represented both in Japanese and then English. Each section of the exhibit has its own dedicated tablet. I think there were probably 1 or 3 tablets per large exhibit section, depending on how much content was being displayed. Each tablet had all the same label copy material, but there were somewhere around 30 languages that you could scroll through and pick from. One of the languages, by the way, was Japanese Sign Language. So when you clicked on that, you would be able to pull up an interpreter or a deaf individual, I'm not sure which, who would present the label copy in JSL. That was such a cool find. Loved it. I don't specifically remember if there were sections of the museum that had Braille, but I feel like there were a few that had supplemental information for blind visitors. The fourth photo on the bottom right is hands down my favorite experience when it comes to language accessibility and technology. let me preface this by saying I don't expect every museum in America to get life-size screens to provide language access, but it was really cool concept for this specific exhibit. As you can see in the photo, there's walls of label copy, and some have small screens which have French narration and French captioning as well as English captioning. In the middle, there is a large column where you see a large screen. There's actually 4. There's one on either side, and then there's one in the rear. Each screen was a story of some kind told in French, and then there were English captions, and there was someone interpreting the content, whether they were deaf or a hearing interpreter, I'm not sure. But I believe they were using international sign because this was an internationally marketed exhibit. So that was really cool. All right, as previously discussed, the primary role of a museum is to function in cultural heritage centers and a space for public to engage in meaning making. But how can that information effectively be dispersed when a large portion of the contributors to that cultural heritage are being left out of the equation due to the museum's lack of sufficient access? All of these words you see here on the screen are directly pulled from the museum definition I showed you before. If a museum by its very nature participates in physical and linguistic exclusion in opposition to this definition that we read, which is believed to be the appropriate function of a museum, then I think we can agree that significant action is needed in response to that discrepancy. Physical and linguistic barriers ultimately limit potential visitors and collections, resulting in the dissemination of knowledge that's supposed to be with and for all, becoming narrowed and targeted to a specific demographic. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. All of this information is the culmination of 3 years of travel and research. Given the opportunity, I really look forward to digging deeper into this topic of language equality and accessibility within the museum setting. As I mentioned in my paper, if I were to take this research further, I would start with an interviewing process. I would interview researchers and developers here at RIT who I know are currently developing new technology for language accessibility. I would also interview diversity and inclusion professionals within museums, deaf museum professionals and docents, as well as non-English speaking community members on their experiences in public education and museum settings. Thanks again for taking the time to listen. If we have a moment, I'd be happy to take questions or have a discussion.
Thank you, Grace Ann. Great presentation. Having also traveled internationally and been in a lot of museums which did not measure up to the standard that you've offered here, I can see very well, experienced the frustration of looking at something and not having a clue really what I was looking at. You have to sort of piece it together, and who knows whether you do that correctly or not.
Right.
One, you know, and oftentimes also when there is an effort, I'm thinking of China in particular, when there is an effort to make it accessible to English speakers, the English is so awful.
Yes.
That is a whole separate issue, but you know,
yes.
At least they tried.
Right.
I thought that definition that you said had not been yet voted on, and I'll ask you why. It included the word polyphonic, so I assume that's sound related. So I don't know whether you would have a comment on that.
I would assume that yes, I would assume that that means that there is audio supplementation to the exhibits for those who maybe can't see, but also opportunities for other types of audio in other languages, because part of the definition that I took out did specifically mention language. So I would assume that that is the definition for the word that they're using, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. So, so I don't know who the International Council of Museums, I mean, is that a UN body? Who? What is it?
I don't know that they're directly involved with the UN, but they are basically an umbrella organization that provides services and counsel to museums internationally.
Is that definition or vision statement, whatever you want to call it, is that controversial in the museum world, or is it just that they haven't got around to voting on it?
No, it was proposed in 2019 and they were going to meet, but then COVID happened. Okay. So I don't think that it's been postponed because there's controversy. I think it's been postponed for health and safety reasons, because the definition is visible on their website. Okay. So they have at least accepted the public to view it. So
I share your curiosity as to why Rochester, which has some aspirations to be a tourist venue, destination, is lagging. I mean, that is a little odd. But I wonder, you know, Rochester used to have a visitor center, I think it was called. Maybe, you know, if you were in the role of advocate, going into advocacy on behalf of this idea, maybe the visitor center would be someplace where you could get them interested so that you wouldn't have to go to each museum separately. Maybe it could be top-down sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
But I really enjoyed your presentation. Lovely job. So I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to listen to it. Now I'll pass it over to Meg.
Thanks, Stephen. Grace, I really was impressed with your presentation. And I have to say it was so process oriented and so very clear what you did, why you did it, and where you ended up. I'm also really impressed with your travel experiences that you've had. Wow, that isn't the average college age or actually 48-year-old adults experience. So I think that's given you like real perspective, different than red perspective, you know. So so I think that's fantastic. I'm curious, you know, about the new. I'm assuming it's a law that, and I don't know what governing body will be voting on it. Will it come with any funding? And the reason, do you think it will, or should it? And the reason I ask that is so in part of my role, we've worked with Rochester organizations on creating experiential learning opportunities for students. And a couple of the larger organizations we worked with, the Seneca Park Zoo and Food Link. The Seneca Park Zoo in particular struggles with accessibility. And I know a big portion of getting to that point where they are more accessible is a huge financial lift, right? So I'm wondering, should something like this come with some type of state or federal funding? Or is the expectation that in order for you to operate, you just are going to have to reallocate your funds and prioritize them to make it more inclusive?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Meg. I don't have the answer. I know ICOM, that they can't put forth a law per se, like they're there to advise museums on what you should be doing to function as a proper museum for your community. Museums exist for their community. So they can't necessarily make them close down, because I mean, the state could, or they could lose their title as museum. It could just be like a community center and not a museum. I would hope that funding would be available through the state and federal government, but I think past experience, we know that that's pretty difficult. Right. So yeah, there's no perfect answer. I would hope that that would happen, but I think it probably depends who we have in office every 4 years of whether or not that would happen.
Right. No, I completely agree. So I guess to follow up, you have developed really an expertise, especially with your dual major and especially with your experiences. So how do you want to utilize those skills and competencies moving forward? I think you're in a really unique position to advocate. Yeah. Curious, what are you going to do next?
Yeah, so I I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to be doing next. I'm waiting to hear back from the government. I'm signed up to be a global ambassador at the World Expo in Dubai this year. So that's going to be very exciting. Hopefully I get it. I'm not sure. I just had my interview Monday. Other than that, my long-term goal is to work within the National Park Service. That is where my passion lies. I have been going to national parks since I was a wee little child, and I have my little passport book and all of that. So my goal is to increase accessibility within the National Park Service. Yosemite has one full-time interpreter. She has like her own deaf services department at Yosemite. And I plan to do an internship with her at some point.
Okay, so whenever you land that full-time dream job with national parks, then reconnect with us and Co-op and Career Services so that we can get you your own interns or paid co-op positions so that we
That would be
can
awesome.
increase the footprint of interpreters in national parks. I'm also a huge fan of national parks, and I'm actually, fingers crossed, going out to Zion and Bryce and the Grand Canyon this summer. So
Yay.
So
yeah, and that's actually probably where I'll end up, because you know, in the middle out west, that's where everybody stops there on their way to another park. So you know, so
right. Well, best of luck. A really nice job.
thank you very much. Should I stay and watch the next one, or
Grace Ann, I
Yes.
do have one other question, but you're quite right. That is exactly what I did. I went to the Grand Canyon en route to those other places. So
yeah.
your information is accurate. So it just occurred to me, how does the ADA come into this?
Yes. So the ADA is it's kind of convoluted. If a federal run agency would have to provide ADA services because they are federally run. If you have a certain amount of employees or a certain amount of people who are always there, then you have to follow the ADA. Small, tiny businesses, maybe not so much. Museums would have to follow the ADA because they are large organizations. And usually following the ADA in that sense is requiring deaf visitors to request an interpreter 2 or 3 weeks in advance.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
That's as good as it gets. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, once again, thank you very much. If you would like to stay, yes, we would be very happy to have you stay, and maybe you will have questions for Samantha when she's done with her presentation. So, Samantha, the floor is yours.
Okay, 1 second, I just had to unmute. And just give me 1 minute. I'm gonna pin Sammy real quick.
could we also spotlight her?
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay.
Do you need me to give you permissions or you're all set?
I am all set. I just need to pull up. She wanted me to follow her script, so I'm going to do that. Okay.
Whoever is like the host, if you could spotlight Sam, that would be awesome.
Oh, yes, actually, during recording, if you don't spotlight Sam, well, you can, it's not because I'm interpreting, so never mind. So yeah, you just need to spotlight her so it'll catch it in the recording.
So just so I'm clear, so I just added the spotlight to Samantha.
Yeah.
Should I pin you, Brenna?
No, you don't have to do that.
Okay.
I'm pinning Sam because I need her to be the big center of the picture. So that was it. But for recording purposes, she would need to be spotlighted.
Okay, so I did that, but
Yep, it'll just pick up my voice.
Okay, all right, all right.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing something that I shouldn't be. Okay,
Nope,
all right.
we're good.
Thank you.
Sure. So I don't think she realizes her share screen went down and.
Right. Okay,
Okay, I'm gonna try and share again.
great.
Okay. Yep, we can see it.
Looks good.
All right. So whenever you're ready. Hi, everyone. All right, here we go. My name is Samantha Goodnough. My project is SamiGood Designs, and that's my brand name. The goal for this project is to redesign my portfolio to give it a more professional look, as well as to fix up some of the online merchandise part components on the site, and that would be considered a second job. So for my portfolio website, I've improved my portfolio website by giving it a more professional look. I wanted this site to stand out more than the others that are out there right now, because graphic design is extremely competitive career. And also I wanted to redesign some of the old artwork that I had in there. There's some skills that I've learned in the past classes that would aid in those redesigns. And however, I still need to have more designs be included. I need to do some refixes, and I'm actually happy about that because I do have more to share and more skills to highlight. So every designer's worst critic is themselves, because you have doubt, and they compare themselves to other designers because they think that they might be better than them. I am highly critical of myself a lot, but I'm okay with that because I know that I'm good at what I do, and I can always do better, but I'm happy with my work. So this has also been challenging to kind of satisfy the design aesthetic within my portfolio style. Like, I've probably redesigned this website about 5 times before I liked the look that I ended up with. As you can just see how they've changed over time. I decided to have the black background, but then I changed that. Also with my aesthetic, it's changed over the years as well. I'm like more bold colors because with this black background, the style has lightened up a bit, which is new because I like the bright colors with the white background. It just fits my aesthetic better. Anyway, you can see how the designs aren't organized or they're not the same size in my older portfolio, which has bothered me for a while, but was working on it. As I said before, I knew I could do better with the skills that I've learned over the years. Some of the designs weren't clean. They weren't smooth or very neat. Also, I knew that this old look wouldn't have given me a second look by hiring managers because it looks like a student's work. It looks like I just learned design. So that's how it was. And I really can't remember. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago when I had initially started this design. But anyway, I actually just started over because I was embarrassed by how my initial website looked. As you can see, there is difference from the previous portfolio to what it is now. I think it's much better, right? For the contact page, I did add some more information. If someone wanted to contact me with a project idea or anything like that. So that way I have more information about what they want, and if I can work with them or they want to work with me and there's a better contact, a better way that they can contact me. So overall, I have the designs that I want to be included, and I like what I see so far. Also, I designed the layout in Adobe Illustrator instead of putting the designs right on the site. That way I have control of how I want the layout to look and how the designs are displayed. I've gotten a lot of excellent feedback about my layout. Some of them inspired change of this layout, so that was good. So I was happy about the feedback I received, because now I know that I'm able to create and use those decisions appropriately into my aesthetic. Are you guys, you want to see the rest of the video, or should I keep going? Keep going or skip it?
Keep going.
Okay. Then as for the online merch, I created that store last semester in another class that I was taking. There were a few mistakes that I needed to be fixed, as in like the search engineering, Google Analytics, also the pay at checkout. All of those were too small and they were hard to, or I mean, all of those were very small things and didn't require a whole lot of fixing. I didn't do too much on it because I was focusing on the portfolio website, and that was a priority. I also wanted to use the site as my second job, because that would aid in the job search for a graphic designer position. And I know it would be very challenging in my hometown. I also know that the store won't actually make a whole lot of money, but it's just a little something for me to do. But I'm not giving up on my job search. This was just a backup plan. So I've been promoting on social media. I use Twitter and Instagram. As you can see, there's my Instagram right there on the phone. It was really more about asking people what they like to see from me and the designs or products they want to see in the store, because it's still so new, it's in progress. I'm still working on those design ideas. It's actually taking some time because I'm extremely busy with schoolwork, and hopefully I'll get back to it by the end of the semester. So here are some of the products. There's posters, mugs, t-shirts. There's other products too. There's, you know, hoodies, pillows, stickers, even masks. I'm planning on adding more variety to these product lines, but not right now. Do you guys have a favorite product or anything that you want to see? Nothing? Okay.
In seeing the posters.
Yeah, those are popular. Those posters are. Okay, so if anyone you know or you yourself are in aid of designs or any kind of graphic designs, let me know. And I can also you can see my contact information on the bullet list. And there's the email and Twitter. I have my professional name. I have a QR code. If you can see there, there's a QR code. It connects you right to my portfolio in a quick way. So I just wanted to let you know. And that's about it for my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Meg, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Sam, I really enjoyed your presentation slides. I really enjoyed your presentation. I thought it was really great for us to see like the before and after. So where you'd started with in terms of your site and where you ended up. I think the side-by-side juxtaposition made it really clear and easy to see the improvements that you made. I'm curious, did you actively go out and seek feedback in the way of like a poll, or were you just asking fellow designers to take a look and provide feedback?
Yeah, I did ask some of my friends who are designers and what their opinions are, like UX, UI. I also got lots of different feedback from other people. I did want that to have the expectations match a hiring manager's expectations. So I wanted them to be able to give me that kind of professional feedback.
Great. Just out of curiosity, how much traction have you gotten on your merchandising store? I am going to check out those posters because I'm a huge beverage consumer. But I'm curious, it looks like some of your merchandise is that someone could say, I want you to make a t-shirt with X design on it. Some of it is your own design. From the traction or the traffic that you're getting so far, what are most people looking for?
So there's a lot of people with interest in t-shirt, but I did ask them, I mean, there's also with stickers too. They want to have them on their phone or on their laptops. So that was surprisingly popular at the moment. The stickers are.
Well, great. I enjoyed the presentation and hopefully you get a lot of traffic on your merchandising store, but more importantly, you get people to view your website and portfolio so you can land a job. So I see a lot of talent there. Really good luck.
Thank you.
Hello again, Samantha. So I have a couple of questions. You mentioned on your merchandising site, you mentioned Google Analytics, and so you can tell who all or how many people are accessing it. Do you have Google Analytics on your portfolio site too, so that you know who's looking at that? Okay.
Yep, I do as well. Yeah.
And so I have no sense of, the volume of people who might find something. I mean, you said you're pushing it out on social media, so people know about it through social media, but I suppose people might happen upon it by accident. But so what sort of volume of viewers do you get?
Just recently I checked, it was just 9 people last week. But I went live online just a couple weeks ago. Most of them are clicked through social media. So whenever I see analytics or visitors, I find that they've gone through the website that way, and they're learning how, I'm trying to learn how to expand my marketing and give people a place to find my products or my website.
Another question, I don't understand the merchandising part. I mean, you're selling, but where do you get the goods from? I mean, you're not making these things yourself, are you? How does that work?
So in the last class that I took, there's a website called Shopify. It's a very popular store where they have a make your own type, what do you call it? Like, I guess it's like a supplier type. So you click through to their website, you click the products you want, and I can include it on my website. So I do the designs on their products. So it happens that way.
I see. I see. So for example, the mug, I like the mug, sleep, eat, and repeat or something, whatever that said. I like that. So you design that, the words, and then you send your design to the Shopify place, and then they make it. How does that work? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. And then you're advertising the product and people buy it from you. So you go back to the manufacturer and say, I want a dozen of these, and then they send them to you, and then you send them to the buyer. Is that how it works?
So it actually goes directly from Shopify to them.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. That's a lot of organization that you've got to do. Okay. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I don't know if anybody else has got any questions. There's a question. Come on, Grace Ann.
Oh, we are on mute. You can sign.
Good sign. Good sign. I wasn't sure if I should sign or speak. Anyway, I know you mentioned before that you're like really critical of yourself and you were embarrassed of some of the colors. I thought that was so funny because I thought both looked awesome. I loved the black background. I also loved the white background. They just had different vibes. But yeah, the new one and the flow and how everything, the visuals of everything of the new one was fantastic. So great job. I'm actually working on setting up a business within the next few years. So maybe I'll hit you up.
Yeah, thanks.
Anybody else? No. So with that, we actually finished within the hour. That's pretty good. All right. So thank you very much, both. I enjoyed both of your presentations. I assume that you will, I think, Grace Ann, you already said you're graduating. Samantha, I don't know if you're graduating after this semester. Are you done? You're done too. Okay. Well, yep. Congratulations, and I wish you all success once you leave RIT. Meg, last word.
Yeah, best of luck. Thank you to Michelle and Nick for also attending, and Brenna for interpreting today. And just so inspired by the work, and I hope that both of you will stay in touch with us and let us know the really good trouble that you're getting into moving forward. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So it sounded like everybody except me understood what on earth Samantha was talking about, because I didn't get that at all. I mean, I just didn't see what she was doing other than scrolling through very quickly.
Right. So one thing that was hard, and I was sitting so close to my computer, is she had it in presentation mode. I'm sorry, she didn't have it in presentation mode, had it in notes mode. So I was afraid she was going to shut it down again, but it was hard to see. So I had to sit really close. I think what would have been more useful, since that clearly was a huge chunk of time that she spent, is if she did side-by-side slide comparisons of where she made big changes.
Right.
It was just, I could see, but it was hard, and it was moving fast since it was a video.
It was totally lost on me. So as a presentation, I would give it a 3, but I guess I'd be willing to go to 4, but I thought it was a 3 as a presentation. I thought it was a poor presentation.
So I gave it a 4.
Okay, all right.
I think about the 3, and I think about Jordan's being a 3, and I don't think it was like that. I thought the slides were beautiful. I thought, I know what you're talking about, but I would give her a 4.
All right, okay, I'll go with that. And I thought Grace Ann's presentation was excellent, and that was a 6.
Agreed. I thought that was so great. And I wish everybody could be as deliberate as she was.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I did. This is what this is the problem. This is what I did. Boom, boom, boom. It's so easy to follow. Right.
That's we should try and remember that for the next orientation, because some of the presentations have been excellent, but they just didn't have that entree to what they were talking about, so that you had a scaffold to build on.
Right, and some of them we had to say, so what about the first thing you talked about?
Yeah.
Because they almost ended in the middle of a project, or I don't know.
All right, 6 and a 4.
6 and a 4.
I think if I remember rightly, I think we've only got 2 in the next one too, maybe. Let me see.
Yes. Oh, wait.
Right, Salatino dropped out, so we've got Beckmeyer and Jepson.
Yes, and I'll tell you right now, I hope Jess, so I have Jess in the 101 class. And she had a Title IX incident.
What's Title IX?
Sexual harassment.
She was accused, or she was the accuser?
No, so this has been going on for a couple months, so against her. And the decision came up, the decision was just made by the Office of whatever, standards and blah, blah, blah. And because it was a he said, she said, they didn't do anything to the boy. So, I think she's struggled a lot. So she is strictly looking at just being done.
Oh, I know all about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope she doesn't just totally bomb. I want her to get a 4. Like, I know.
And remembering the way it was to begin with, it took all my work to actually get her to agree on a project of any kind at all. So
I know. She's got a huge, massive chip on her shoulder.
Yeah. All right. Well, it will be what it will be. So we'll be there at 2 o'clock, right?
Yeah. Shoot. I didn't stop recording. Damn it.